On that gray day, Olga kept her eyes downcast throughout her grandmother's wake. The handkerchief crumpled between her fingers was not enough to contain the weight that was pouring from her face. All around her, there were muffled conversations, automatic condolences, and the haughty presence of Anton, her older brother, dominating the scene as always. Dressed in an expensive overcoat and with a measured posture, he shook hands and received hugs as if he were the true pillar of the family. Olga. Silent, seemed too small in that hall full of empty faces. For her, the loss was intimate, raw, and devastating. Maria Stepanovna had been more than a grandmother. She had been her safe haven in a life of invisibility. When the lawyer announced that the reading of the will would take place right there, Olga didn't even have time to process her grief. Anton straightened his posture as if he were about to receive a prize. And in a way, he did. The three-room apartment in the heart of Moscow was handed over to him without surprise. But when Olga's name came up, along with the mention of an old house in the village of Zarecha, the atmosphere seemed to tighten. Anton let out a muffled, ironic laugh. He called it a consolation gift. Olga just nodded, lacking the strength to argue. At that moment, however, what she didn't know was that the worst was yet to come at home. The drive home was silent but tense. Igor, Olga's husband, didn't say a word to her during the journey. His eyes were fixed on the road, his jaw clenched, his breathing heavy. When they reached the small apartment where they had lived for years, he didn't even take off his coat before starting. "Is this it? An old house in a rotten village?" he shouted, throwing the envelope with the keys on the floor. Olga, standing at the door, still holding her snow-wet coat. She tried to explain, to say that perhaps there was a reason, that her grandmother wouldn't do something without thinking. But Igor wouldn't listen. He called her useless, a dead weight, said that all she knew was to disappoint. And then, without further ado, he threw her out. He threw her suitcase into the hallway as if he were throwing a bag of garbage. Olga didn't react. She picked up her suitcase, still not knowing how to process what was happening. It was dark outside, and the cold cut her skin like a razor. She went down the stairs of the building with her eyes blurred, but without crying. In her pocket, she only had the keys to the house. She had inherited, and some money she had saved as a precaution. That night, she took the first train to Zarecha. She didn't know exactly what she would do when she got there, or if she would have a place to sleep. She only knew that she had to get out of there. During the hours in the empty carriage, she stared at the dark window, seeing only her own reflection and trying to remember her grandmother's last hug. The feeling wasn't exactly fear. It was a mixture of exhaustion, disbelief, and something strange, like a very thin thread of hope trying to survive. When she got off at the small station in Zarecha, day was already breaking. The air smelled of wet wood and cold earth. It was a quiet, almost forgotten village, with uneven cobblestone streets and houses with crooked wooden fences. Olga pulled her suitcase across the gravel, trying to find the address scrawled on the envelope of the will. She asked a man sweeping the sidewalk, and he pointed without saying anything. Just with a nod. She crossed 3 streets and then saw the house. It was old, yes, but different from what she had imagined. The windows were intact. The roof was sturdy. It didn't look abandoned. The garden was overgrown with tall weeds, but it had an odd feel. as if someone had taken care of it not long ago. With a trembling hand, Olga turned the key in the lock and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The air inside was still, but it didn't smell musty. The floor creaked beneath her feet, but everything was surprisingly clean. There were curtains, furniture covered in white sheets, a fireplace with fresh ashes. It was as if someone had left the place the day before. She walked through the house in silence, touching the objects as if touching memories. Each room revealed something of her grandmother: old photos and frames, a handmade quilt, books stacked in discreet corners. But what really caught her attention was the bookcase at the end of the hallway, which seemed out of place. When she pushed it, she heard a sharp click. Behind it, a narrow passage opened. When she got off at the small station in Zarecha, day was already breaking. The air smelled of wet wood and cold earth. It was a quiet, almost forgotten village, with uneven cobblestone streets and houses with crooked wooden fences. Olga pulled her suitcase across the gravel, trying to find the address scrawled on the envelope of the will. She asked a man sweeping the sidewalk, and he pointed without saying anything. Just with a nod. She crossed 3 streets and then saw the house. It was old, yes, but different from what she had imagined. The windows were intact. The roof was sturdy. It didn't look abandoned. The garden was overgrown with tall weeds, but it had an odd feel, as if someone had taken care of it not long ago. With a trembling hand, Olga turned the key in the lock and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The air inside was still, but it didn't smell musty. The floor creaked beneath her feet, but everything was surprisingly clean. There were curtains, furniture covered in white sheets, a fireplace with fresh ashes. It was as if someone had left the place the day before. She walked through the house in silence, touching the objects as if touching memories. Each room revealed something of her grandmother: old photos and frames, a handmade quilt, books stacked in discreet corners. But what really caught her attention was the bookcase at the end of the hallway, which seemed out of place. When she pushed it, she heard a sharp click. Behind it, a narrow passage opened. The letter was written in the same soft, firm handwriting that Olga remembered from the notes she had left when she was a child. Maria began by saying that she hoped Olga had arrived safely, that she knew that the house had never been a burden, but a shelter. She told how, for years, it had been there that the family had found solace in difficult times, and that Olga had shown a deep connection to this place since she was a child. She said that she had not left her the apartment in the city because she knew that there, amidst the concrete and the rush, Olga would lose herself even more. The house in Zarecha was a gift conceived with love and purpose. It was the heart of the family, and only Olga could keep it beating. Her granddaughter, in her words, was the only one who had eyes for what could not be bought. After reading the letter, Olga climbed back up the stairs on shaky legs. Every room in the house seemed to breathe with more meaning now. The memory of her grandmother was in everything, in the furniture, on the walls, even in the silence. When she reached the kitchen, she found an old kettle on the wood stove. There was still chopped firewood outside. She made herself some tea as she had done when she was a child, and sat at the table, feeling the warmth of the cup between her hands. There was no television, no cell phone signal, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't miss anything. She Was alone, yes, but she no longer felt abandoned. For the first time that day, she cried, not from pain, but from relief. Later that day, Olga decided to explore the rest of the house. In the basement, she found an iron door partially covered by an old curtain. The lock was rusty but not locked. Inside, there was an old safe built into the wall. On impulse, she typed in her date of birth. The click of the mechanism sounded like a whisper from the past. Inside, in addition to some of her grandmother's personal belongings, there were dozens of letters, yellowed photos, old documents, and a thick notebook with records of the family's history. There were even mentions of rare books that had been smuggled out during times of war and hidden there as a form of cultural preservation. This was not just history, it was identity. Leafing through the documents, Olga saw names, dates, and manuscripts of great-grandfathers and uncles she had never met. One of them had been a bookbinder. Another a translator of classic works. The letters spoke of the importance of keeping memories alive through the written word, and that not everything that matters has a shape or number. One sentence caught her attention. You have not been forgotten. You have been chosen. The sentence was repeated in 2 different letters, as if Maria wanted to make sure that she knew this in every part of the house. Olga spent hours there, absorbing everything with an almost sacred attention. She no longer felt angry with Anton. In fact, he would never have understood the value of it. He wanted concrete and dollar signs. She had inherited roots and meaning. Later that day, Olga decided to explore the rest of the house. In the basement, she found an iron door partially covered by an old curtain. The lock was rusty but not locked. Inside, there was an old safe built into the wall. On impulse, she typed in her date of birth. The click of the mechanism sounded like a whisper from the past. Inside, in addition to some of her grandmother's personal belongings, there were dozens of letters, yellowed photos, old documents, and a thick notebook with records of the family's history. There were even mentions of rare books that had been smuggled out during times of war and hidden there as a form of cultural preservation. This was not just history, it was identity. Leafing through the documents, Olga saw names, dates, and manuscripts of great-grandfathers and uncles she had never met. One of them had been a bookbinder, another a translator of classic works. The letters spoke of the importance of keeping memories alive through the written word, and that not everything that matters has a shape or number. One sentence caught her attention. You have not been forgotten. You have been chosen. The sentence was repeated in 2 different letters, as if Maria wanted to make sure that she knew this in every part of the house. Olga spent hours there, absorbing everything with an almost sacred attention. She no longer felt angry with Anton. In fact, he would never have understood the value of it. He wanted concrete and dollar signs. She had inherited roots and meaning. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began to sink behind the village trees, Olga went out into the yard with a blanket over her shoulders. The weeds grew tall around the house, but there were traces of old vegetable gardens, worn wooden benches, and even a gazebo covered in dry leaves. She sat there for a few minutes. Taking in the forgotten details. A group of children ran past on the other side of the fence and greeted her curiously. An old man with a dog waved from afar. For the first time in years, Olga felt like she could breathe without the constant weight of being judged. There was no more Igor criticizing her, no more Anton putting her down. Here, In this seemingly forgotten place, she was just herself, and that was enough. Back inside the house, she lit the fireplace. The wood crackled with a sound. That brought back memories of childhood, of the cold nights when her grandmother would tell stories from ancient times. Olga chose one of the oldest books in the secret library, a French edition, with delicate, yellowed pages, and ran her fingers over the letters as if she were touching a reliquary. She began to read, calmly, as she had done when she was a child, hiding in some corner of the school. The words took shape before her tired but attentive eyes. She wasn't just reading a text. She was finding herself again. And as night fell over Zarecha, she understood that she hadn't lost everything. On the contrary, perhaps she was finally beginning to truly live. Later that evening, Olga lit the candles scattered around the house, as her grandmother had done. There was no electricity in every room, but that didn't bother her. The soft lighting created shadows that danced across the walls, filling the room with an almost forgotten calm. She organized some of the library's books into stacks, wiping down the shelves with an old rag she found in a closet. With each volume reread, each dust removed, it was as if she were restoring not only objects, but also pieces of herself. The work calmed her, and her mind, for the first time in a long time, was not racing or on alert. The silence of the house was welcoming, not threatening. At some point, she sat down in front of the fireplace again, this time with her grandmother's notebook on her lap. Among recipes for natural dyes, hand-drawn maps and carefully recorded memories, she found a last page written in faded blue ink. If you ever get this far, it's because you've won, even if you don't know it yet. That sentence stirred something inside her. Olga understood that Maria had foreseen everything. Anton's contempt, Igor's cruelty, the loneliness of the gray days. And yet, the choice had been made with love and conviction. She had not received less. She had received what no one else would have the sensitivity to. Value. And that was more than comfort now. It was strength. Around 11 o'clock at night, Olga heard a soft knock on the door. Startled at first, she peeked through the side window and saw a woman wearing a headscarf holding a basket. It was Irina, the neighbor from the house next door, who had recognized Olga from the old days when she spent her vacations there with her grandmother. "I heard you came today. I brought some fresh bread and hot soup," she said without ceremony. Olga hesitated. But opened the door. They sat in the kitchen, and between silent spoonfuls and small comments about the village, Irina said that Maria was very respected there, even if she was discreet. "She talked a lot about you. She said you were sensitive, but strong. That one day you would come back and bring light to this house again." Olga didn't know what to say. She could only smile, her eyes brimming with tears. After Irina left, Olga stood in front of the door for a few minutes. She could smell the soup still in the air, mixed with the burnt wood. The feeling of belonging was strange, almost uncomfortable because it was so new. She was not used to being welcomed without having to prove anything. Here, no one demanded diplomas, achievements, or status. In that single day, she had been thrown out of her home, faced her brother's contempt, and traveled miles to reach a place where, unexpectedly, she was welcomed with kindness and dignity. Olga went upstairs to the room that had once belonged. to her grandmother and lay down on the bed covered with an old quilt. The mattress dipped slightly beneath her tired body. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in many years, slept soundly. The next morning, before the sun had even fully risen, Olga woke up to the soft light streaming through the thin curtains. Her body still ached from the fatigue of the previous day, but there was a lightness in her chest that she had not felt in a long time. She went down to the kitchen and put water. On to boil, repeating her grandmother's gestures almost by instinct. She felt connected to the house in a new way, as if each object there was part of a living memory. She decided to explore the village before her commitments and responsibilities caught up with her. As she walked through the dirt streets, she stopped at small shops, chatted with locals, and heard old stories about her grandmother, stories that had never been told to her before. She discovered that Maria helped people with literacy, organized readings, and lent books from the hidden library to those who knew how to keep a secret. When she returned home, she found a young woman standing in front of the gate, holding an envelope. She was a researcher from a local university, who, upon learning of Maria Stepanovna's death, was trying to contact the family. She explained that there were rumors about the existence of a rare library in that house, with documents that could be of great historical value. Olga received her. Cautiously, but allowed her to enter. She showed her the secret room, still disorganized, and watched the young woman's eyes shine as she looked at the books. She explained that some of those works, depending on how well they were preserved, could be worth a fortune. And more than that, they could be registered as cultural heritage. Olga did not answer right away. She was no longer thinking about financial value, but something inside her told her that collection could not remain hidden. Forever. A few hours after the researcher's visit, the old telephone in the living room rang. It was Anton. His voice sounded dry, almost impatient. He said he had heard about the hidden library from acquaintances in the city and wanted to talk about a possible exchange. He would offer the Moscow apartment in exchange for Zarecha's house. He spoke in a negotiating tone, as if he were doing her a favor. Olga listened to everything in silence. There was no argument, no shouting. She simply replied calmly, "This house is not for sale." And she hung up. It was the first time she had said no to her brother without fear. Not out of pride, but because for the first time, she knew what she was worth. And it had nothing to do with the value of the books. It had to do with everything that this place gave her back. Dignity, peace, purpose. After that, she sat on the library floor and stayed there for a long time, her back against the wooden wall, watching the light reflect through the small window. It was strange to think that all of that had happened in just one day. A day that began with loss, humiliation, and abandonment, and ended with deep roots being rediscovered. Olga didn't have all the answers yet. She knew that the next steps would require courage, that she would have to learn about conservation, perhaps seek support to restore the books, open the house to other people. But for the first time, that didn't scare her, because that space was now hers. And more than that, she was finally her own. As the hours passed, Olga mentally organized what she would do next. She took out a new notebook and began to jot down ideas, names of people in the village who could help her, possible uses for the space beyond the library. She thought about transforming part of the house into a cultural center, with reading workshops, storytelling, and meetings for the elderly and children. It was ambitious, yes, but not impossible. And, for the first time, she allowed herself to dream out loud, even if only to herself. The feeling of uselessness that Igor had planted in her for so many years was beginning to wither. It no longer made sense to live under someone else's shadow. Now, Olga understood that she didn't need to be great in the eyes of others to be whole. She just had to be true to who she was. That night, before going to sleep, she lit the fire again and chose a random book from the library. It was a volume of ancient Russian poetry, something that would never have piqued her interest months before. But now, every line seemed to make sense. She read it in silence, with the blanket over her shoulders, while the logs crackled softly. The sound, the smell, the warmth. It was all part of a new beginning. And when she finished reading, she looked up at the shelf in front of her. There, among the aged pages and memories stitched together by generations, was the legacy that no one else had seen, but that she had been able to recognize. Olga no longer felt like a woman rejected by a will. She felt like a guardian, and that was enough. Before going to bed, Olga walked to her bedroom window and looked outside. The village was quiet, just the distant sound of the wind through the trees. Down in the yard, the dim light from the porch still illuminated some of the tall grass and the footprints she had left earlier. There was no luxury, no modern comfort, but there was truth. There was presence. She felt a tightness in her chest, not of sadness, but of gratitude. For everything she had endured, for having been rejected, for having been forcibly torn away from the place where she believed she belonged. If none of that had happened, she might never have understood that her grandmother's love was not in sweet words. It was in the silent choices, in the inheritances that no one wanted, but that carried all the value in the world. As she lay down on that old bed, surrounded by furniture that smelled of history and walls that held echoes of generations, Olga felt something different. Peace. For the first time in many years, she didn't worry about what others would think. She didn't feel guilty about existing. She wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The house, the books, the memory of her grandmother, all of that was now part of her. And she, part of something bigger. She understood that life doesn't always reward the loudest, nor does it always hand its treasures into the hands of the most ambitious. Sometimes the greatest gift is the one that arrives disguised as loss. Olga closed her eyes slowly, with a slight smile on her face, and fell asleep feeling something simple, but that had seemed unattainable until then: belonging.